Well, hello and welcome to the webinar. This is the business case for adopting Tin Can, why and how 5 product vendors chose to adopt, so you're in the right place. We're going to be looking at 5 different vendors and what their business case was for adopting Tin Can. This particular webinar is targeted specifically at product vendors, so if you've got a product you're looking to adopt Tin Can, this is the webinar for you. If you're an organization, maybe not a product vendor, maybe using a learning product, you may still find this webinar useful, but we're actually going to be running another webinar in future, specifically for organizations, talking about the business case for them. I should also say this webinar isn't an introduction to Tin Can, so if you're new to Tin Can and we're looking for a beginner's guide or Tin Can 101, again, this webinar isn't really aimed at you. But if you go to tincanapi.com/webinar, you'll see a number of recordings on there of previous webinars that do cover that topic, do give you that basic introduction to Tin Can. My name's Andrew Downs. I'm a Tin Can evangelist at Rusty Software, which I think is probably the world's coolest job title. And I'm your host for this webinar. I'm going to be introducing the various panelists, giving us a summary at the end, and taking you through the question and answer section, which will come at the end of the webinar. A point on questions: if you do have questions, please ask your questions throughout the webinar as they come up. You should be able to see the questions panel on GoToWebinar. Please do ask your questions, and we will answer as many of those questions as we can in the final section of the webinar. If we don't get through all the questions, we will be publishing a blog afterwards with every single question and an answer. Sometimes we group questions together, but all the questions will get covered with an answer from myself or from one of the panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Nick Stevenson from Training Evidence Systems. And I'm very grateful to all our panelists for joining us, but particularly for Nick. It's about 2 a.m., 3 a.m. in Australia at the moment. So really appreciate Nick joining us and talking to us about how he's implementing Tin Can in his applications. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it's 4:30 here, so I apologise in advance if I sound a little incoherent at times. Just trying to navigate to the next slide. I don't seem to be able to navigate slides, Andrew. So.
Let me, I'll move on. There we are, I've moved it on for you.
Okay, I'm not seeing that at my end, and my apologies, but I'm just seeing you still.
Here we are, sorry, apologies. There we are, you should be able to see the next slide now. Apologies for that.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Nick Stevenson, CEO of Training Evidence Systems, and we've built a platform that enables companies to better manage and measure their on-the-job training and assessment and coaching activities. When we look at other verticals outside of L&D, we see these vibrant ecosystems where apps and services can be quickly meshed together to solve business problems. So the obvious question for us is, why isn't this happening in learning and development tech? Let's just look at some of the data that our apps capture around coaching. So for example, Jane coached Joe in sales negotiations. Then Jane assigned Joe the task of ghosting sales associate Jill for the day. Then Jane assigned Jill the task of assessing Joe. At present, we have no APIs or systems to send our data to. The new types of data we capture just don't fit into the traditional LMS data structures. So the L&D departments just can't report on it using their existing systems. That's why this is what we sort of call internally the LMS problem. And when I'm referring to LMSs, I'm really referring to those old dinosaur enterprise systems that we all know well. So the LMS problem comes down to 3 things. Clients can't receive enough new data types. Very few systems allow for integration beyond basic SCORM and limited LMS-specific APIs. So reporting is restricted to very limited data sets. And of course, most progressive training departments out there are aware of these problems. and they want to move on to more advanced technology. Sorry, I'm missing a slide. So for us, XAPI is kind of that move. It's a well thought out, flexible spec, and it lets us send the data around to our customers that they want to collect. So XAPI is a quick way for organizations to link best of breed solutions together to meet their requirements and to participate in a progressive L&D ecosystem. So I just want to walk through with you very quickly the efforts we put in to implement XAPI. In our system, we collect a bunch of events. We grab the ones relevant to XAPI and transform them into XAPI statements. And implementation for this process was stunningly quick and really easy. Our first completion statement took about a day to send. And after that, it took us about 6 developer days to have full integration. Then we could send XAPI statements basically related to anything meaningful in our apps. So what did this end up giving our clients? It gave them much better reporting via their LRSs, e.g. the Jane coached Joe workflow. They can now capture data that previously went uncaptured and get some business value out of it. And the good thing is this takes about 2 minutes to set up from our system. So it's really quick to demo the utility of this sort of thing and encourages L&D departments to have a go and explore this sort of new technology and move into it. I just want to touch briefly now on the role of XAPI and recipes because we think they're also very important as an addition to the spec, an important part of the future for vendors like us. Some of the data we send to send is really complex, and LRSs need a way to make sense of it for reporting. And the data needs to be sent in a standardized way, and an ecosystem needs to operate with standardized data sets. And that's where recipes come in. There are many ways of representing the Jane coached Joe type workflow, but if that workflow is captured as a series of standardized XAPI statements, then any LRS can interpret the data according to that recipe. One example of a recipe is the attendance recipe we built in conjunction with Andrew Downs, who's hosting today. That recipe will, basically standardize the statements and workflow around attending training sessions. It was a complex process. It took us about 7 days of development time to document and design, but then after that implementation only took a couple of days. In other instances, we could simply use the spec as is to send statements. So we use CMI interactions to meet our observation checklist requirements, and the existing spec covered all the statements we need to send. So we're hoping recipes will lead to even better reporting of advanced workflow in LRSs and other systems. So our internal business case for XAPI, the first thing is customers can quickly see the value of our system. They know the data we collect, and it can be easily shared with our other systems. And also by adopting XAPI, we've become part of a growing ecosystem of progressive L&D organizations. And I guess lastly for us, from a business scaling perspective, XAPI handles a lot of the mundane integration issues that we face as a vendor. So we can really focus our attentions on building out our products and that kind of thing. So XAPI as an integration tool really helps us to scale in that respect. So that's it for me. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Nick. So yeah, our next presenter is Hugh Edwards from Gomo. Gomo is an authoring tool, so over to you, Hugh.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I'm Hugh Edwards, Solution Consultant at Gomu Learning, and just want to run you through the Gomu Learning Suite and how we're using and adopted XAPI. Okay, so first of all, what is the Gomo Learning Suite? Well, really it's two products that enable you to create, host, update, and then track multi-device learning anywhere. So the first component is Gomo authoring, and this creates responsive and adaptive HTML5 content automatically. So from a single HTML5 codebase, content can be published once and accessed on desktops, tablets, and smartphones. Gomo hosting and analytics allows you to deliver contents to users via websites, LMSs, social media sites, and more, just with a single click, and then delivers full XAPI tracking and reporting. So how does Gomo take advantage of XAPI? Well, we've built XAPI tracking into both the Gomo authoring, the hosting, and the analytics packages. So courses delivered from the Gomo Learning Suite talk to the Learning Locker LRS to store the XAPI data, and then the analytics package talks to Learning Locker to read XAPI data and display within the analytics dashboards. So what was our business case for adopting XAPI? Well, because Gomu is already a cloud SaaS product, it was a very easy decision to add cloud-based hosting and XAPI analytics. And we feel XAPI is the future of learning experiences, and at Gomu we intend to be at the forefront of learning going forward. So Gomo creates content that works on any device, and really device type was a metric that we're hugely interested in. We also wanted detailed analytics on user learning experiences so that Gomo customers could improve their learning outcomes. And the challenges in convincing our business of the value of XAPI. Well, really the decision to implement XAPI was led by our customers who were looking for greater insights into learner behavior and experience. We realized that XAPI could give us so much more than SCORM. And with the cloud solution, we realized that we had an easy way to integrate our hosting solution with any LRS. Also, we're part of the Learning Technologies group alongside Leo and Preloaded. So we're constantly pushing the boundaries of learning theory and practice. And by adopting XAPI, it keeps us at the forefront of the latest developments in learning delivery and analytics. So what steps did we take to adopt XAPI? Well, the decision was taken last summer 2014. And initially, XAPI has been hard-baked into the actual Gomo authoring so that we can automatically create XAPI statements from every screen and every interaction within the learning content. And then the next phase is going to be to allow authors to create their own XAPI statements within the product. But dashboards for the XAPI analytics have been built into the Gomo hosting product from the start. So what value has XAPI added to the Gomo product? Well, XAPI allows Gomo users to gain a really deep and meaningful insight into learner behavior for the first time. So this results in better learning experiences and improved learner outcomes. And from a commercial perspective for Gomo, it's strengthened our product offering and allowed us to differentiate ourselves from pure authoring tools so that we can now offer a complete e-learning solution to our customers. So for example, Dunhill used Gomo hosting and analytics to deliver their what they call their new range training, so to all of their retail outlets around the world via in-store iPads. And the XAPI data allows Dunhill to instantly see which stores have completed their training and ensure that their customers get the best introduction to the new ranges. So finally, just to give you a glimpse of an example of the Gamo analytics dashboards which are using XAPI. So this is the dashboard for a particular course or project. And notice that there's a breakdown of the device types that learners have used to access the content. So really powerful information for organizations to use when considering their training delivery. And this is the learner dashboard, which essentially is showing their learning journey through the course, again, pulling in the XAPI data. So that's a brief overview of the Gomo Learning Suite and how Tin Can Next API is benefiting our products and both our customers. So thanks, and back over to you, Andrew.
Great, thanks to you. And next up we have Stuart Jones from Unicorn talking about how they've implemented Tin Can in a range of their products. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, I'm Stuart Jones, and I look after our platform technology at Unicorn. As a learning solutions company, we use a broad spectrum of learning technology, and we've been exploring different uses for Tin Can. This includes our learning management system, which is called SkillServe, and that also includes a simple authoring tool called the eCreator, and as well as supporting a wide range of content uploaded by our end users. We also provide a lot of off-the-shelf e-learning, ranging from our own compliance suite of courses to courses from our partners that we also deliver via our learning management system. And we were a custom-built e-learning shop before many of the other things, which has meant we've gone through all the pains of integrating with other learning management systems, both with completely custom-built content and with the wide range of authoring tools out there. And then much more recently, we've been working on fun learning games and different ways of delivering them. So this gives us a wide range of opportunities and challenges, which we see Tin Can helping with. Gone too far, sorry. So our first objective has been to add Tin Can support to SkillServe, our learning management system. We wanted to be fairly early adopters so we can learn more about Tin Can and its use and use it as the starting point before adding to our other solutions. So our initial implementation has enabled us to upload Tin Can courses both via a zip package and also linking to courses hosted across the web, something which wasn't even possible with SCORM or AICC due to cross-site security issues. We achieved SCORM parity initially in our reporting, the time spent, completion scores, pass, fail, and bookmarking. However, from the very outset, we've been capturing Tin Can data into the integrated learning record store, so then we can start thinking about how we're using that data moving forward. So why do we adopt? Well, starting at the end, it is the future. AICC and SCORM have been around a very long time. They came out long before smartphones and tablet computing, and even before the term cloud computing became popular. This means they don't particularly work well nowadays, where content can be harvested from across the web, and they certainly don't deal with learning that isn't launched directly from the LMS. They're also quite limited from a technological and security standpoint. So Tin Can was built to address these issues, and it's going to be a big driver as the learning tech industry matures. We do a lot of work with professional bodies, and their members need to record informal and structured learning that takes place outside of the LMS. Tin Can helps make that possible with a standard way of recording data to send back to a record store or LMS when convenient. And finally, mobile apps. Users typically will download mobile apps or games directly from an app store. So Tin Can helps us build an experience that starts in the app but still captures the data we might need later on. So I think the biggest challenge has been the same as any new technology. We've been in those kind of early adopter stages for a while now, and that means it's been a bit slow to take off. But this is changing, with more and more vendors starting to add Tin Can capability, and as their products evolve, so does their Tin Can support. Early versions of authoring tools were very limited. However, the authoring tool support is now improving, and that's creating new ways to capture the learning experiences. But I think even more importantly, there are now different types of learning providers adopting Tin Can, so it helps us break away from the traditional e-learning mold. The way we approached Tin Can support within SkillServe was fairly simple. We decided to plug in and integrate the learning record store built by the people who helped define the standard, Rusticy. So by licensing SCORM engine, that gave us a fast route to market, and it's ensured that any updates to the standard get reflected in SkillServe very quickly. So from there, we've been then busy testing third-party tools for readiness, and we've now started to add Tin Can support to our content and to the new apps that we're developing. So just to conclude, we're now adding support to a range of other products beyond SkillServe. We're working on a couple of learning games for clients. One is a diagnostic assessment, which is disguised as a 3D racing car game. And this will include leaderboards, and Tin Can will enable players to download from the App Store and then submit their high scores to the LMS once complete. We've been investigating how we can use Tin Can to support campaign learning with a range of learning experiences tracked using Tin Can. And an extension to that is adapting our CPD app to support Tin Can statements, allowing interoperability between other systems. And finally, we've been opening up our eCreator authoring tool along with other content creation features within SkillServe via our ContentServe learning content management system. So we launched an initial version using SCORM earlier this year, but we're now extending it to support Tin Can. And that means that some of the features we had before can be opened up with much richer reporting. But SCORM only was the limited reporting we talked about earlier. Tin Can will open the door for us to be able to send back a much richer set of data. So that's it from me. Over to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you very much, Stuart. So next up we have Chuck from Tribridge talking about Tin Can in their products. Over to you, Chuck.
Hello, I'm Chuck Grice. I'm the Director of Application Development at Tribridge HCM. A little bit about Tribridge. Tribridge is a technology services firm headquartered in Tampa, Florida, that specializes in business applications and cloud solutions. Today I'm going to be talking about our human capital management team, Tribridge HCM, and how we implemented Tin Can into our HR technology solution. As a partner to platform providers like Cornerstone On Demand, we work with organizations to customize their talent management systems to meet their specific needs. In today's webinar, we will focus on Amplify HR solution. It's a cloud-based enhancement suite built to personalize the functionality of the talent management platform. I'll be talking specifically about Amplify HR and Content Hub, and how we utilize Tin Can and Content Hub to provide a better solution. The business case for Content Hub, it was really customer driven. Our clients were challenging us to provide a better understanding of how learners were using their content. For example, they wanted to know, why people were maybe dumping out of videos, or were people actually pausing a video while the content was being played. And Tin Can really, allows for us to do that and record that in a predictable way. Another example was we had clients who wanted to provide offline content players, and those content players, they want them to be network aware so that when the learner could access their content from anywhere, the data would then be sent back to a centralized data repo where they could do the reporting. And once again, Tin Can really allowed us, Tin Can and the LRS really allows us to accomplish that. Tribridge's customers were asking for more from their content and from their technology. So leveraging Tin Can and the Watershed LRS, our customers were constrained by legacy technologies and legacy standards. By utilizing Tin Can and the Watershed LRS, we can track behavioral interactions in a more meaningful way. We can utilize the activity statements from the user's interactions and the content and record those interactions into the LRS, providing a more meaningful and deeper understanding of what the learner was doing with that data. And our end product is a more unified view in a learner-driven ecosystem, where the learner can then bring in content that may be unstructured or informal learning that they can then bring into their own learning path, and they can make their own context of the learning, still having the structured learning, but also being able to integrate content from outside of the learning management system. So implementing Tin Can. Our implementation of the Tin Can API was driven by our customers' needs. In addition, several early adopter clients were knowledgeable about Tin Can, and they began looking to accomplish specific functionality. For example, they wanted to track people's paths through an application. Tin Can really helped us with that. So once we used Tin Can, we began to understand that if we utilize the standard, we could then utilize it into our other products and product integrations. Using interoperability standards decreases the unknowns when we're integrating applications. For example, we are providing a streamlined publishing process from Domino's authoring tool Claro into Content Hub. While building Content Hub, we've been utilizing Tin Can from the very beginning. Some of the challenges that we faced with implementing Tin Can is seamlessly integrating back into those learning management systems. And we're working through that process right now, and we'll be working through it in 2016. So to sum it all up, why did we pick the standard? One of the main reasons that we wanted to work with Tin Can was there's a vibrant open community, and all you have to do is go out there and look, and you can find tons of information. There's registries, there's recipes, there's a predictable way to integrate, and we feel that this ecosystem is just burgeoning, and we're on that road, on that path now.
Great, thanks very much. Next up we have Marty from Cognitive Advisors talking about his Track Learning Experience Manager and how he's using Tin Can. Over to you, Marty.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. Yes, our product is called the Track Learning Experience Manager, and we were founded, Cognitive Advisors, the company that built it. It was founded about 3 years ago, and built from the ground up with the Experience API. And I'll explain why we decided from the very beginning to make use of the Experience API, even before it was officially a standard. So Track, first of all, is a mobile software as a service, software that optimizes the development of workplace skills that leads to business results, the focus on results. And it does that primarily by managing and tracking learning paths that include formal, informal, and on-the-job learning, and then provides a targeted, what we call nano-coaching workflow, small, tiny coaching interactions. And so Tin Can is a key piece for making this happen. I'll step back for a second and say why. My background is in cognitive science and studied how people develop expertise. And as you know, and probably many of you have heard because you're here, the whole idea of the 70-20-10 idea is that we know that most learning happens not during the formal training period, a piece of it does, but most of it happens through on-the-job experience and informal coaching. But the thing is, though, whether or not we like it or not, that happens. But that on-the-job learning happens, but it's very haphazard. It could take a long time to develop expertise, and that's why they say it takes 10 years. So we want to create a systematic set of experiences and optimize that process. And we want to have a way to manage and track the process beyond the formal training, which of course the LMSs do fine, but what about all the rest? And so Tin Can became an important part of how to do that. And then briefly, how we look at how do we put that together is we think of learning as a continuous learning process. And this is how people learn naturally, and what we need to do is support that process. And the core is we learn by doing, by reflecting on what we've done, and by planning what we're going to do next. Okay, and so therefore you can think of developing a skill of proficiency as a series of these cycles. Okay? And so how do we set that up? How do we manage that? How do we track all that? How do we support it? How do we support each of these pieces? The doing, which could be doing the job task or a simulation or game or modeling, providing that performance support on-demand content, providing scaffolding, which is a lot of support at the beginning of the process, and taking that support away, giving that guidance at the teachable moment. And how do we capture that experience? And then how do we support the reflection process? That's a key part of learning. If you're going to learn by doing, reflection is a key part that's often neglected. And how do we make that reflection targeted so that you can get the key principles that you can apply next time you do something? Okay, and they can do that through coaching, through sharing. If you share and articulate things, then you solidify that knowledge in your mind. So how do we set that up in a systematic way to enable people to do that? And how do you get the feedback that people need? And then finally, there's the planning. What am I going to do next? What's the next thing on my landing path? And what am I going to do differently? How am I going to prepare? And that's where some of the formal learning comes in. So, for example, if I'm going to do something, let me get a quick e-learning course right at the moment, or as soon as possible before I'm going to do something, not 3 months before or a year before, but also informally, asking someone, looking things up in a knowledge base or a content system. So this is kind of how, actually for many years, based on this and cognitive apprenticeship principles, design learning. And here's why Tin Can became so important. I was doing this for customers and in a consulting capacity, and they'd say, yes, this is the way to go. And they would not do it. And the reason they didn't do it, it turned out, is because it was too hard to manage and track all of that, all these pieces in a systematic way. And there was no way to do it. And it's actually so happened here in Chicago, I happened to be with a little community of practice of people who were thinking about the future of learning. One of them happened to be Aaron Silvers, who ended up working at ADL. And when he got the job over there and said, oh, I'm doing this new thing, the Experience API or Tin Can. And he told me about it. I said, oh my God, we can use this. This will enable us to track and manage all these things outside of the LMS. And so we started Cognitive Advisors and built software that finally we were able to do it because of these technologies that emerged. Of course, mobile, allowing this all to happen all over the place, just changed the whole game. And an Experience API or Tin Can enabled us to track all those pieces and do the analytics that people really need to know what's really going on, and correlate that with the results. And award badges, our system awards badges that are authenticated and be able to do that. So these technologies were the enablers. And finally, we can do the stuff, frankly, I've been wanting to do for my clients for the past 10 years. And so here's how it works, basically, and this is I want to show where the pieces, where XAPI fits in. So basically, based on a proficiency or competence, we set up a learning path. Okay, we can do an assessment beforehand if we want to. But then that path is made up of formal learning activities, workshops, e-learning courses, informal, so looking things up, social, a quick video, okay, and experiential learning, the real world on the job activity, and that's where most of it happens. So how do we track all that? So of course, the formal learning, if we use Gomo or we set up one of these systems that are Experience API compatible, then we can directly get the statements to the learning record store. But what about the informal? Well, you can set up a knowledge base or content system to send messages. But what about the social, the real world, the stuff that doesn't happen online? That's where we use the sensors of the device and the mobile device to capture the real thing. This is the video, the audio, the checklists, GPS, all the things that capture the real world thing, and then send them statements related to that to the learning record store. And that's also what enables us to set up what we call a nano coaching process, where you capture what you've done, it gets sent to whoever set up as your coach to give feedback, and based on guidelines that are given to the coach, and all of that, those interactions are tracked using the Experience API. So one of the things, and one of the key things here is that enables us to do that tracking and analytics and reporting, to award the badges, and then most importantly, to then correlate what people have done at a fine-grained detail with performance metrics. Okay, so if they do this and this, and the salesperson does these things, how does that affect their sales numbers? How does it, for a technician, how does it affect their first-time fix rate, or whatever it is? Okay, and those are the key things. And then finally, that allows you to then make recommendations as to what do I need to do next, and creates the system. And here's the thing why Trek is so important, why Tin Can is so important for Trek, is that our tool is kind of a connector. It's an operating system for learning. We don't store the content, the formal learning stuff, the informal, all that stuff is elsewhere. So we need to connect with other organizations, with other authoring tools. So the more authoring tools in the ecosystem that have our XAPI compliant, the more we can work together. The more knowledge bases produce XAPI statements or video servers, the better we can track that stuff. So the more there are organizations and that take this on, as there's a critical mass forming, and I think that's one of the things that people were saying. Once we get this critical mass, which we're getting close to, then our customers can have this ecosystem that puts all the pieces together in a systematic way, and we can all work together and increase the value of all of our work. And that's how I see the benefit of Experience API as a core piece of where we're taking learning in the next decades. So with that, by the way, just the system itself is a web application, so it works on any device, mobile or tablet. And again, since it's cloud-based, the Experience API lets us to have this open ecosystem and to organize and create dashboards that organize that whole ecosystem.
Great. Thank you very much, Marty. That's brilliant. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, before we move on to the question and answer section of this webinar, I just want to take you through my key takeaways from what our various panelists have talked about today. So firstly, Tess, who was great, what Nick was talking about, how TinCan really facilitates a learning ecosystem. And in fact, Marty was just mentioning it again, that all these different products can work together to add value to one another and create that learning ecosystem. Also, Nick mentioned recipes being ways of sending statements in a particular use case, a particular type of learning or other activity. Recipes are really helpful, and as you're adopting TinCan, if you're not familiar with recipes, do get in touch with us, do read about recipes on tincanapi.com and look at implementing a recipe. And if you're wanting to create a new recipe, as Nick mentioned, I can help you to do that, so please do get in touch. From Gomo, I really love the Gomo story as an example of a tool that's using XAPI to take their product into a whole new offering. It's an authoring tool, but actually they're using XAPI to also offer hosting, tracking, and analytics. And also the fact that the way they're using TinCan really supports their product's particular focus. So Gomo as an authoring tool really focuses on working really well on mobile and tablet devices, and so they're using TinCan to track activity on those devices and tracking which devices the learner's been using. So using TinCan to support the particular focus of their product. For Unicorn, it's great how Unicorn have worked through their products one by one, adding TinCan support. And if you've got multiple products, or even if you've got one product, you don't have to implement TinCan all in one go. You can add on additional TinCan features over time. There's a saying here in the UK, you can't eat an elephant all at once. You can take it step by step. And we saw that with each new product, TinCan brought different benefits for the different products. And also that where possible, they've used existing technology rather than reinventing the wheel, which is absolutely something that I recommend doing. With Tribridge, it's really great to see how Tribridge are using TinCan to collect data from activities that the learners, their customers' learners are already doing these activities, and then they're collecting TinCan data about those activities, bringing it into Watershed Learning Record Store, and then using that data to generate actionable insights from the data. With Trek, we've just heard Trek being used to track all kinds of different learning experiences, many of which happen outside of the LMS, not traditional learning or not traditional e-learning. And as Marty mentioned, the more and more activity providers adopt TinCan, the more powerful TinCan becomes, because we can collect data from all these different sources to paint a full picture of the learner's journey. Now, hopefully listening to these different panelists has encouraged you to want to adopt TinCan in your products. And we've got a ton of resources on tincanapi.com. There's introductions, there's technical guides for developers, code libraries to make it really easy to actually achieve the technical task of sending the data, prototypes that you can follow, a registry containing a number of recipes and identifiers that you can use, and most importantly, the contact form. You can ask us anything, and we're really keen to help you to adopt TinCan in any way that we can. And talking of asking us anything, we're now going to move on to the question and answer section of this webinar now for the next 20 minutes or so. And I hope you've been asking questions as we've been going through the webinar. As we're answering your questions, we have some questions for you as well. So there's a poll that's going to pop up in a second. And please do answer that poll. It really helps us to get an idea of who attends the webinar and tailor these webinars as best we can for people. So please answer the poll. And if you've got any questions at all, if you've not asked them already, please type them into the question panel. And we are going to answer those questions now. Here we are. So I'm not seeing any questions in the panel just yet. Jeff, have we got any questions in? Here we are. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong panel. So first question is for Nick. It's how many recipes did you create, attendance and others? And another one for Nick, maybe you can do this at the same time, Nick. Which LRS did you start off with as a test environment, and how did you manage testing of other LRSs? So, Nick.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, firstly, on the recipes, we started with attendance because it was kind of the hardest one to tackle. Had lots of moving parts, and as part of that process, we actually built a complex recipe in order to support our applications, and also Andrew helped us build a simple recipe to sort of, I guess, deal with the basic level of attendance XAPI reporting. So we started with that, and now we're starting to work our way through some other recipes around notifications and assignment of users. So that's how we started. So we've built one in full and we're working on others, but building that first one was a very useful experience. We learned a lot from it. Moving on to LRS testing, we tested with any LRS we get our hands on at the same time. So we tested, you know, with a Watershed, Saltbox, Learning Locker, and yeah, analytics straight away, and we test with all of them on an ongoing basis.
Great, thanks, Nick. Do any of the other panelists want to chip in on any of those questions? I know they're targeted at Nick, but no, maybe not. Okay, that's great. And the next question is a general one. Can you provide us some tin can data capture examples that you couldn't capture from SCORM 1.2 or SCORM 2004? There's so many different examples. Basically, you can capture any piece of data with tin can, or certainly transmit any piece of data with tin can. So, I mean, we've had some examples already. For example, the Gomo example, they're tracking things like which device the learner's on, which is something that you can't capture with SCORM. We've had tests talking about tracking attendance, tracking observation of real-world activities. So that kind of thing can be tracked. Trek's been used to track real-world job tasks, and tracking a photo of a job task that somebody's done, or a video, or a piece of audio. Again, all things that you can't track with SCORM. So really, the possibilities are endless of what you can track with tin can. You can only track a very limited set of things in SCORM. Great. Have we got any other questions? Here we are. So many L&D professionals are still all about the 10% of the 70-20-10. No one even wants to discuss the fact that 90% plus come from informal sources. Any advice on moving beyond this for denial? I know that's a good question for Marty.
Yeah, this is Marty. I think that's a key thing, and I believe that people are starting to recognize that. And a lot of what I do is I talk about, just our natural experiences. I say to people, think about how you learn something that you're really good at, okay, some skill that you have. And I ask people when I do presentations, I ask them, how many of you learn these things from an e-learning course or from a classroom? And almost nobody raises their hands. How many learn from doing things and getting feedback and trying it, making mistakes and having some mentor you? Everybody raises their hand. So we all know that this is the way people learn. It's just that we've gotten through traditional schooling and all kinds of ways, we've gotten kind of skewed into thinking that that's not the way we learn. So sometimes just connecting back to people's intuitive understanding of how we learn is a way to do that. Plus, there's more and more research in cognitive science, there's a lot of people who have written about 70-20-10, which of course is just a guidelines, but it's the concept of most of learning happening on the job. There's more and more research that's showing that.
Thanks, Marty. And the next question is actually about Trek, so hopefully you can answer this one as well. How specifically is Trek tracking the real-world learning?
Well, what Track does is it uses the mobile devices or the device's sensors. So, for example, if you're doing an installation of a piece of equipment, you might use your phone to take a picture of it, and then a picture is captured, uploaded, and sent, and then stored. A statement is generated about it, and then that is then enabling someone, a coach, for example, to give feedback on that. Also, it could be a video, or it might be an observation checklist. Here's the things I've seen right here, and it can be done asynchronously or synchronously. So it's using those sensors of the devices to capture those real-world activities. And that's all I have to say on that.
Looks like Andrew might have been disconnected. I'm not sure. Let's give him a moment. We'll go ahead and ask the next question for Andrew. This is for Gomo. Can your authors send custom XAPI statements, and how are they triggered? What level of customization is offered? Verbs, object, result, etc.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, it's Hugh from Gomo Learning here. Well, as a first step of the implementation of XAPI, that we have just implemented the statements for the built-in screen interactions. However, the next step is going to be allow people, customers, to be able to create their own XAPI statements within the product, so that they have that flexibility in terms of the actual in terms of XAPI and how they want to use it personally. So. Just summarize that we took a first step of just to implement as is within Gomo, and then to move on and then take advantage of the huge flexibility in XAPI with the future release.
Great, thank you. We have another one for you, Hugh. This is, can a course developer using Gomo modify the statements that are generated? For example, can an activity in Gomo generate a custom statement that can be recorded in their own LRS?
Thanks. Yeah, well, again, at the moment, in effect, those statements can't be directly modified. They are sort of quite hard baked. However, what you can do in terms of, though by default we're using Learning Locker, you can actually modify the target LRS so that you can be recording and doing your own analytics back into your own LRS as well.
Excellent. Andrew, are you back on?
I think I'm back on. Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Perfect. Apologies for that, everybody. So the next question is, would you have, okay, so the question here, I think I've spoken to the person asking this question. Would you have also a dueling quiz app where I can challenge my colleagues on a rating list? So I think the idea is where you have a quiz where people can be, you know, that they can quiz against each other and compete against each other in these quizzes. So I'm not aware of any products that specifically do that myself, but I don't know if any of the panelists want to correct me if anyone offers that.
Sure. I think something along those sort of lines, where we're developing this this racing car game, we're kind of applying gaming mechanics to what might be just a traditional kind of quiz where you have to answer questions, but turning it on its head a little bit, where we're racing around a track, and every time we pull into the pit stop, we get asked a number of questions, and that gives you little power-ups that you can then race around the track. And if you get all the questions right, you'll go around the track faster. And then we're using Tin Can to start posting that data back centrally. And the the environment for the user is they will go into the App Store to download. So it's not going to be something that's launched from the LMS. So it's something that wouldn't have been possible previously with SCORM or AICC. But we are capturing the how people answered the questions and obviously ultimately how well they scored is what goes back into a leaderboard, and really that's just to try and to encourage participation, and we're using it to kind of reinforce the learning that we're doing. It's a more of just a fun way of getting them to play the game, snackable gameplay and etc. But by combining the outcomes of those quizzes and the scores, I guess that's getting a little bit close to what you're saying. Really, it's leaderboards off the back of what they're doing within the game itself.
Great, thanks, Stuart. And actually, now you mentioned leaderboards, I remember I was speaking to another vendor at a conference earlier in the year. They were talking about they used Tin Can, and they said adding a leaderboard was so straightforward for them because they had all that data, and it really didn't take much effort at all when one of their customers asked for a leaderboard. So yeah, that's great. Any of the other panelists want to chip in on that one? We'll move on to the next question. Great. So the next question is, what are the estimated hours of effort for employees and managers to create and manage their Tin Can API experiences, and how much time is estimated to be needed to use this approach? Just before I pass over to the panelists, I think what I want to say here is there's a few different ways of capturing Tin Can API experiences. That occasionally you can track existing learning experiences that are going on, in which case there's no effort for the employees and managers. And then in other cases, you might want to allow employees and their managers to record experiences that are happening in the real world, for example, in which case they might want to put some effort in. So I don't know if Chuck from Tribridge, if you want to answer, maybe I think my understanding of Tribridge is it's not taking staff any more time. Would that be right?
Yes, our objective is to build tools that are unobtrusive in that sense. We don't want to build something that creates the learner who already has to do a job, has to ingest new information and then also complicate it with them having to now understand XAPI, which it's not complicated, but then again, they have their job to do, and that's really how we see it. So we're building tools that utilize the spec to better report and better understand how people are consuming content, and then also building tools that allow them to augment their own learning in ways that just haven't been possible, and still track. And because since I got this Fitbit, I realized that I don't walk unless the thing is completely charged. So tracking is very important to understanding what people are doing and how people utilize content and learn.
Great, thanks, Chuck. That's brilliant. I'd like to hear from Nick on this question as well, because obviously with the test apps, there is some active recording going on there.
Yeah, so I guess we see that our customers should be able to abdicate all responsibility for knowing really about XAPI at a sort of technical and probably a statement level. They should just plug and play and be, other than know it's an integration tool, should be oblivious to it. But from the company's perspective, from someone implementing XAPI, the overhead's not much. It's once you get your head around the format of statements and such, it should be, from a vendor perspective, little overhead, quick and easy to implement. I guess that's all I've really got to say about that.
Great, thanks, Nick. That's great. We'll move on to the next question. There might be some more answers in there in the Q&A. Can a Tin Can-based learning event be integrated with SCORM for tracking purposes? That's a great question, and we'll post, when we do the Q&A, we'll post some links to some resources for this. There is absolutely ways to integrate SCORM with Tin Can, and actually there are a few different tools that will translate SCORM data into Tin Can data, and anything that you can track with SCORM can be translated into Tin Can data. It is also kind of possible to send the data the other way, although because tin can data is so much richer and tracks so many things that SCORM can't track, you obviously can't translate all the data back into SCORM data, but it is there are some possibilities here. And the next part of that question, is it possible to use tin can API on an already running SCORM Moodle-based LMS? Absolutely. Tin can API and SCORM aren't incompatible with one another. You can actually use them both on the same system with no issue. And in fact, if you've already got a lot of existing SCORM content that you like and you want to keep, it may be sensible to keep that content running SCORM and use tin can for some of these more advanced applications and maybe for any new content that you create. Obviously then translating your SCORM data into tin can data, as I mentioned. Next question. As a content creator who sells, I'd like to know more about security. Does tin can help with that? Have been looking for solutions inside an LMS that can block ripping and sharing. Have only found 2 solutions, but are not an LMS system, more a video streaming service. So tin can doesn't explicitly tackle I think in terms of security, what you're talking about here is security of the content, stopping people taking that content and using it somewhere else. And that's not a topic that tin can addresses. However, what tin can does allow you to do is to do your tracking of content server side. So you can host your content on your own server using server-side technologies, either PHP, .NET, or whatever Java, whatever you want to use, and keep that content on your server, and then send the tracking data server-side, which might then allow you to apply other security techniques that wouldn't have been possible with SCORM content that has to be zipped up and given to the organization to upload onto the LMS. So it doesn't directly help with security, but actually some of the ways tin can be applied could well help with security. The next question is for Marty again with Trek. Can you go further into detail on the real-world 70-20 part of tracking via XAPI? E.g., what's the value of tracking that a learner captures a photo of what they're doing? People generally don't understand how to use this. So how are people using that data, Marty?
Well, that data is being used more as part of our coaching process, as part of the system. So in other words, it's stuff that's used for someone. The main reason for using it is basically 2 things. One is it enables someone who's set up as a coach asynchronously to give feedback, and based on guidelines and checklists that can be set up, as well as it also provides evidence and artifacts. Now, so those photos are not stored, in the electronic store. They're stored within our system, kind of we call it a portfolio, e-portfolio setup. But the record that was done and the approval by the coach or not, and those types of things are all the things that are stored within the Experience API, or a tin can.
Great, thanks, Marty. And we've got lots more questions, but we're out of time, I'm afraid. So as I said, all the questions will be, we'll put them into a blog with answers from myself and from the panelists, and we'll get all of your questions answered. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. The slides and the recording will be published online shortly, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks for coming.